Welcome to Ignite Your Confidence for women in leadership who want to speak up and stand out. I'm your host, Karen Laus. Here you'll get all of the tips and tools that you need to stand out with unshakable confidence. Let's dive into today's episode. Welcome, everybody. We have got Jessica Kriegel here, and she's got an amazing story that I recently learned more about. And we actually work together on some level at Culture Partners. So I'm thrilled to have you here today, Jessica, and I'd love to have you introduce yourself. Go for it.
Thank you for having me. Yeah, I'm Jessica Kriegel. I am the Chief Scientist of Workplace Culture at Culture Partners. And I just joined a few months ago when my business was acquired by Culture Partners. And now I lead research and strategy on all things culture. We are doing some really cool research right now that we're going to be coming out with in the next few months. And my background is primarily in the technology industry. I spent 10 years at Oracle, and then I left Oracle to do a startup where I was the CHRO, and now here we are.
Yay. Well, I want to hear more about this. I love the term scientist. Tell us more about that related to culture.
Well, if you ask 100 CEOs what culture is, you're going to get 100 different answers. And a lot of those answers are going to be really wrong. What I mean by that is they're going to think that culture is the way that people feel, or it's about the perks that you get at work, like ping pong tables in the lobby and Hawaiian shirt Fridays and whatever other cool things you hear about these days. But culture is really about sustained behavioral change and how you can drive behavior to get results. And that is something that can be measured and can be tangibly invested in a way that you can actually create change that is predictable. And my culture journey started many, many years ago when I felt like leaders needed to be convinced that culture was important. Long time ago, right? These days, I don't think that convincing needs to be done as much because it's pretty obvious. But 15 years ago, you needed data. And so I have always been really interested in gathering the data around culture and the softer skills at work and the impact on financial metrics, as well as employee fulfillment and well-being. And so, yeah, the science that we do is really the research around behavior, around the neuroscience of leadership, around how organizations collectively operate and creating not just feel-good moments like in team buildings, which, a team building 2-day get-together will make anyone feel good for a short while. But when you go back to your desk, if everything is the same, culture hasn't changed. So how do you really create sustained behavioral change in a way that we can measure and activate?
Yeah, absolutely. So what is an example of that? Can you give us one?
An example of culture?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we believe that culture is the experiences that we share that shape our beliefs, and those beliefs determine the actions that we take, and that's what gets us results. So culture is really a journey that we go on as individuals. And what I love about this definition of culture is that this isn't some cool workplace trick or a model that someone created in a laboratory that was all about the workplace. This is how people are, right? I mean, when we're children, we have experiences in our family, with our colleagues, with our peers in school, with our religion, with a million different things. And those experiences shape the beliefs we have about the world. And those beliefs determine the actions we take, whether we shoplift or not, whether we go to college or not. And those actions get results, either good results or bad results. And so this is just the nature of people. It's how we evolve. It's how we learn, how we progress, how we develop in our own humanity. And we are people doing business. So it works at work too. And that's what's so unique about it, is it's about how we collectively come together to do things together.
Yeah, I think it is absolutely fascinating. And like you mentioned about the ping pong tables and how people tend to think, oh, this is what we need to do to make ourselves better. And that isn't it at all.
Yeah.
I know that you've got a fascinating story, and many women that are listening to this are very interested in you as a person and how you came to be where you are. Would you be willing to share how you got your start and how you got to where you are today?
Yeah, sure. Well, I graduated college as a theater major and knew that I was no good at theater. So I moved to London. I wanted to explore the world. And I spent my very first job was a recruiter. Well, not my very first job. I had college gigs, right? But my first career corporate job was as a recruiter, a headhunter in London. And I just absolutely hated it. It was the worst culture of all time. I mean, just toxic and
Mm.
crushing, you know? So I lasted 9 months and I thought there's got to be a better life for me than this. And moved to Italy, spent a few years in Italy. I was teaching English and I met a guy who had a culture consulting firm. It was leadership development and culture. And he was taking English classes from me. And when I learned about what he did, I was like, teach me everything that you know. Be my mentor. I will work for you. I'll teach in English. And so that was really the beginning of my real career. Was I put together, I remember this whole business case of why he should hire me as a contractor for a
And
consulting firm.
when was
But
that? When was that? How
that
many
was
years
in
ago?
2005. Yeah,
Okay.
a long time
Okay.
ago. So
Yeah.
yeah. And he was like blown away that I was, so organized in my pitch to get hired. He was like, this is very American. Like, okay. And but he mentored me and I got to work with him and I got to do so many interesting workshops with so many incredible leaders. And a couple years in, I remember I was coaching the vice president of communications at Sky News, which was one of the Rupert Murdoch News Corp organizations. And I just remember wondering what in the world communications meant. Like, VP of communications with whom? Like, what are you communicating about? I was like, I am only 23. Maybe I should go learn a little bit about business before I start coaching leaders. I mean, I just had no idea what I was talking about, except I knew how to stand in front of the room and ask the right questions. But really, my business acumen was at zero. So I went and got an MBA. And after I got my MBA, I went and worked at a startup in Silicon Valley. And that startup was acquired by Oracle. And then I was at Oracle for however long. And there was one part of my story, which is maybe the juicier part, which is when I got a performance evaluation where someone told me that I had a 2 out of 3 on interpersonal skills because I was like that annoying kid that sits in the front row of the classroom, constantly raising their hand saying, pick me, pick me. And I was just devastated. And they said, you need to just chill, like back off.
Oh,
And that was when I quiet quit. That was in 2010. And I was
wow.
just like, you know what? Screw this place, screw everyone. I was so angry, because I loved my job. I mean, I loved my job. And the beauty of that moment was I decided I needed to put my energy somewhere and I went back to school and I got my doctoral degree. And that's when I studied generational dynamics at work. And that's where the research for my book came. That's when I developed my researching skills when I became the doctor that would become the scientist and started learning about the dynamics of organizations and stayed at Oracle while I was doing that school. So it took me a while to get through and then the rest is history.
That's amazing. You had mentioned something to me offline last time we talked, and when you really kind of took off, like 2020 sounded like that was a pretty significant and monumental year for you. Would you be open to sharing what happened at that time,
Yeah.
how you shifted?
It's actually a good example of culture in action. I had an experience, I would call it an experience and a half, and it shaped a new belief. So so where did it start? My dad and I were always very close, and we would go on these walks every single morning. And those walks were an hour and a half long, and we would talk about parenthood. And I was pregnant, and I hadn't told anyone what my daughter's name would be. I just said, well, I'll tell you when she's born. I was worried that they would judge the name or whatever. And so my dad said, we're going to call her Violetta. Just for now. When she comes, we'll change it to whatever it is. But for now, let's give her a name. So we called her Violetta on these walks. And I would ask him questions about when Violetta gets here, what should I do about, restaurants? Do I let her run around or do I make her sit down? We would just talk in hypotheticals about parenthood. It was super fun. And then she was born. And 9 months after she was born, my dad had an aortic dissection and he died very suddenly and unexpectedly. And it was just tragic for me because he was my guy, he was my
Sure.
person. And I started to spin out. I mean, frankly, I had a downward spiral of life choices that I made, and I started drinking a lot, and I started drinking even more. And my husband left me a few months after that because of the choices that I made. And when he left me, I was just totally blindsided and devastated. And I also had a victim mentality. I was like, this is happening to me. Like my dad died and my husband left me, and taking no accountability whatsoever of the choices I had made to create my husband leaving me and all sorts of things. I mean, I was just a wreck. And um when the morning my husband left me, I was like, okay, I got to go work out, because that was like how I coped with having feelings, that and drinking. So I got in the car and the car wouldn't start. So
Oh,
then I was like, let me get in my bike. So I get on my bike, and the bike has a flat. So I'm like, let me use my husband's bike. I get on my husband's bike and the seat won't stay on. And I didn't believe in God. If I did, I would have thought that he was telling me not to go or something.
yeah.
And so I'm like, I guess it's time to go on that walk. I had not gone on that walk I went on with my dad since he passed, because it was too emotional. But I went on the walk, and I called my best friend, and I was talking about, my husband just left me and I don't know what I'm doing with my life and blah, blah, blah. And he said, well, how do you feel? I said, I just feel really alone. I feel like I miss my dad. And my friend said, what would your dad say? And I said, my dad wouldn't say anything. He would just do something that would let me know that everything is going to be okay. And at that exact second, I looked down at the ground, and there was brand new graffiti that had never been there before. And it said Violetta.
Oh,
Yeah. And I fell to my knees, and in that moment, I instantly believed in God. I just
wow.
knew there was something uh, out there, right? I mean, I just knew that wasn't a coincidence.
Yeah.
And that was an experience that shaped a new belief, and that new belief led to me taking new action. I started making better decisions. I stopped drinking. I started thinking about taking accountability for my life rather than blaming everyone else for doing things to me. And then I started getting new results. I mean, 2020 was the year that I stopped drinking, and I just like everything kind of opened up. I realized that there was this spiritual path, which was really critical for me in my journey anyway, that I needed. I didn't know what God I believed in. I never went to church before. So it
Yeah.
wasn't like, oh, I believe in this God. I just knew that there was something, and I signed up for divinity school because I'm a school
Oh
person,
my
and
gosh.
yeah, so
I
I'm
didn't
still in
realize that.
divinity school now, and I'm learning about all the different gods, and learning about religion, and learning about its role in society and culture generally. So it's
Wow.
really been feeding a lot of my interest in behavioral science too. And I'm super interested, side note, on like the soul of business,
Mhm.
leading with soul, and like how we can, without the religion thing, which is so polarizing, right?
Yeah,
Just
for
seeing
sure.
each other as people who are more than just flesh and bone, but spirits, and that come alive and have a purpose and a higher calling, and whatever that is for while also honoring the different ways that we approach that conversation. And so that's my little story about how I had an experience that got a new result ultimately.
That's a huge I love that you said it's a little story.
Well, it really is a little story. I mean, there's 7
Oh
billion people
my
on the
gosh.
planet.
I know, and it's absolutely fascinating. So I'm thinking about people that might have been in a situation, and by the way, I'm so sorry about your dad. That's
Thank
just
you.
really, really just sad. And especially since you were so close, and so many women in particular are not close to their dads. So that's just really, really cool that you had that experience. What would you say to a woman who is feeling like she feels like there isn't any hope, or she's had a lot of loss, whether it is someone significant that died or a spouse who maybe left her, perhaps if in the same situation as you, what advice might you offer?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I've gotten to the point where I see my father's passing as a blessing. And the reason is because, at least for me, I needed to hit bottom in order to go up.
Hmm.
You know, I was trapped in a spiral, death spiral of my own making, and I couldn't see it. And when I got to the bottom. There's this great book by Richard Rohr called Falling Upward. It might be a good book for that listener that you're talking about to pick up. And falling upward is like, we have to go down in order to go up. And there's something that happens when you have this life challenge that you can't overcome with the level of thinking that you have had up until this point, and it makes you elevate your consciousness, right? And so it could be like when people get a prognosis of something, like they get cancer, or they have a near-death experience, or they have a bottom, like how I did. Mine was an emotional bottom, right? I hadn't lost my house or my career or my, I had lost my husband and I had lost my sense of self. But I mean, that kind of bottom makes you, you get desperate for a solution and you start looking in other places. And I think that was what I needed in order to turn things around. And that is a gift. I mean, the ability to take accountability now and not have the victim mentality, I didn't do that. There was something out there that gave that blessing to me. That higher power out there gave that gift to me because I wasn't doing it on my own,
Right.
It wasn't until I opened up to something else. I mean, I think just, this is an aside, but it's a talking point that I think is interesting. I think COVID was a kind of collective bottom for corporations. Organizations went through their kind of bottom. And I think the reaction you've seen in organizations about focusing on less burnout, employee well-being, being the whole self at work, that's a direct reaction to this bottom that we collectively hit with, organizations feeling like, wait, is this the end? I mean, everything, remember how scary the beginning of COVID was? I mean, it was
Yes.
terrifying,
No idea what was happening. Yeah.
And I think that's part of why people understand that culture is important now, because we went through that and we're like, we do have to care about people. No, people are the answer. It's why I don't need to prove the point as much anymore, which is such a godsend. Now we get to do the science to figure out what's the right way rather than whether or not it's worth it.
Yes, absolutely. So true. Well, when you think back to where you were before, I'm curious, did you know, so I know you had that Italian guy that you said, I want to learn everything from you. Did you know in theory before your own, first of all, I have to take a pause and say thank you for your vulnerability. I just have so much admiration for you, just saying it so matter-of-factly, because talk about blessings to other people. I mean, that just opens up so many worlds where people can feel like they have permission to do the same. So first of all, I just did not want that to pass by without saying it. And so what I'm wondering is, so you talked about the victim mindset, that you had that. Did you know in theory, like educationally, that that was not a healthy place to be, or the thing around accountability, like you said? I'm just curious if you had that intellectually, but just emotionally you hadn't bought into it.
Yeah, I absolutely knew what a victim mentality was. I mean, I did this like self-actualization seminar when I was in college that was all about, you're in charge of your universe and manifestation and all, everyone read The Secret. Like I got it, but
Yeah.
it was like, but having to turn the mirror on myself is a lot harder than pointing out everyone else who's got a victim mentality, And I had ownership of certain things. I mean, my career got to where it was at that point. I was already keynote speaking. I was already had written the book. I mean, I had had a lot of success in my career up until that point, which was a direct result of me, taking life by the reins and having a sense of ownership and not being a victim to circumstances and, about some things. But I hadn't figured out some of the more challenging and emotional things like the interpersonal relationships in my life and, how to love myself. I mean, the things that, 30-year-old women struggle with, I was struggling with those things and having complete blind spots. As I probably do now, still have many blind spots. I can't tell you what they are because they're blind spots,
Like
but
the rest of us.
yeah, I mean, more will be revealed, right? I'm just going to keep learning and keep figuring things out. Like I was doing a gratitude meditation yesterday and I was being grateful for having all my limbs. And I'm like, wait a minute. That's not gratitude. Being grateful that you don't have someone else's problem. Like, what am I grateful for? And how do I even know that that is a problem? I mean, there's someone on our team who doesn't have a limb, and is it a problem for him? I don't know. I mean, that's not the point. So then I was like, well, I'm grateful for my aches and pains because it's my special challenge that
Oh.
my higher power has given me that I get to overcome today. And it means I'm alive, and so that's maybe one of my blind spots I'm working on now. And the one I'll work on tomorrow more will be revealed.
I love that you are so open to growth and that you dive straight in head first. So
Totally.
what would be your best advice for someone who is wanting to have more confidence, but they just don't?
Mm, more confidence. Fake it till you make it. I mean, I did that. Was it a good idea? I actually need to reflect on that more before I give that piece of advice. I pretended to be confident my whole life and didn't actually feel confident until the last 2 years. I mean, until I got sober and I started acting normal, as I like to say. Um, but it certainly made people think I was confident, right? But it
Yeah.
was I think that actually so I'm taking back that advice because now that I reflect on it, give myself half a second. I'm an extrovert. I like to think out loud. When you're faking it, you have inauthentic relationships. You know, I
Mm.
was an image of a person to the people that I was having interpersonal relationships with. It wasn't my authentic self. And I could even open up to people about being a little insecure, and it still wasn't really the truth. It was like part of the story. So maybe
Yeah.
don't fake it till you make it. I mean, the spiritual path is I don't need confidence because I know God loves me. In the moments when I don't have that love for myself, I know that someone does and that someone that is always there and always will be there way past my own lifespan. So, I mean, my higher power is really where my confidence came from. It's not something I did, and it's certainly not something I got through my career or my success or my accomplishments or any of that. Because, I mean, that was just completely useless in my self-esteem. It didn't help at all. It seemed
Oh,
like it would. It
oh,
was
yeah, I would think so.
it was almost like I was a workaholic. I was trying to fill the void in my heart with this. I had this God-shaped hole in my heart that I was filling with work, and I
Mm,
was like, no matter how much I could grasp at, there was still nothing there.
yeah.
Service, being of service, you have to in order to have self-esteem, you have to do esteemed acts, as they say. So that definitely helped. There's another book, The Second Mountain by David Brooks.
Oh, thank
That
you.
would be I'm highly recommending anyone who thinks that they might be able to get their self-confidence from their career exclusively, read that book.
Wow. Okay. Really good advice. Thank you. What do you think is the biggest challenge for women today in the workforce?
Um, this is gonna sound like a silly answer, but I'll explain it. Being a woman, and what I mean by that. Let me explain. It's probably not as
Say more.
articulate as you would like.
It's all good.
What I mean by that is, I get on calls where I'm the only woman and I notice I'm the only woman. And then I get to spend a bunch of time wondering if anyone else notices that I'm the only woman. And then I wonder if I'm dressed okay and if I'm talking in a tone that's being taken seriously. I just saw an article. It's like, turns out women don't need to change their voice to be taken seriously. It's like, I'm
Yeah.
so glad someone's doing research on whether women need to change their voice. I mean, not. I mean, how annoying is it that we've got
Yeah.
people asking that question? And when men get on those calls and there's only one woman on the call, 9 times out of 10, they're not thinking about being a man and whether they're dressed appropriately and the tone. And they probably don't even notice that there's only one woman on the call. And that is male privilege. It's
Mhm,
the privilege to not have to think about all that stuff and
mhm.
be distracted by those things going on in your mind and trying to push them out of your mind and focus. And so it's just the burden of being a woman is my answer. Even if you've got everything together, there's still
Yeah.
that dynamic that we are less frequently in the boardroom than men. And until that gets a little bit more equitable, it's going to continue feeling like we're different.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Well, is there any specific example that you want to share about a success story of a company related to culture? Something where you came in or the team came in? I'm really curious.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I worked with this one technology company so the key to culture if there's one thing that your listener should take away is that culture has to align with strategy. And we are culture agnostic, as I like to say. I may have a preference, and I'm sure you have a preference of the kind of culture that you like to work in, right? But when we're working with clients, we don't try and push our preferences on our clients, because that may or may not make any sense for them based on their strategic goals and based on ultimately their purpose. What
Yeah.
is their why? How do we help them accomplish their why? What are the strategic goals? The purpose is the why. Your strategy is your how. So the culture is the way you get those things. It's the way you get results. And so first thing we do in any culture engagement is figure out strategic plan. Because what is your purpose? How are you going to get there? Will determine the kind of culture you need to foster and nurture. And so with this technology company, they realized that they needed to get diversification of their product lines. They needed to create 14 new products within a year. I mean, it was some kind of astronomical thing that was going to require big investment in R&D and also innovative thinking that they did not have at the company at the time. They needed to nurture innovation. Now, not every organization needs innovation, right? There's plenty that will need to do something that is the opposite of innovation, like bureaucracy, because they're highly regulated and whatever. And that's not better or worse, it's just different. And so with this particular organization, we kind of reverse engineered that definition of culture that I shared to figure out what they needed to do. So, okay, here's the results. We need to get this diversification of our product line. That means the action we need to take is we need to be more innovative. Well, what broadly held beliefs will we need to hold in order to get more innovative and behave in a more innovative way? And we asked the employees that question. We didn't keep the conversation at the executive level. We said, let's ask everyone, frontline employees up to executives, what beliefs would you need to hold? And the resounding feedback that surprised the executives was, we would need to believe that the executives are actually willing to invest in risk. Because innovation takes failure. You have to fail fast and try things and experiment. And if you're not willing to budget for risk, then what you're doing is you're setting your employees up for failure, because they're going to fail by definition, right? And then if they get consequences for that failure, it's not going to create a belief that's going to make me want to act with an innovative mindset. And so once we figured that out, we said, what kind of experiences would the organization need to create in order for people to hold the belief that the organization is prepared to invest in risk and failure? So we created an innovation program that required failure resumes to enter. People were recognized for failures that they had achieved. They literally created a budget line for failure and shared that on an all teams call. They had all these ways that they had created experiences for employees so that they could believe that innovation was the way of the future, and that innovation led to new behaviors, and they did get those 14 product lines. So the model works. You just creating an intentional culture is possible. You just got to know what culture is and sometimes get a little help.
That is fantastic. What a great example. Oh my
Yeah.
gosh. And how, you know what? I love Sarah Blakely from Spanx, the CEO of Spanx. And I
Yeah.
love her story as a kid, where her dad would have them go around the dinner table and celebrate how they failed that day. And it reminds me of the same thing. It's just
Yeah.
so fascinating how in our culture it is just, it's something that most of us don't even want to have happen. You know, we want to be perfect. We want everything to be aligned, and that's just not realistic. So
Ryan Leake is another author that has great books and also a speaker on this topic. So, and he does great social media stuff. So follow Ryan Leake if you're interested in that line of thinking as well. And he's also someone who's kind of spiritual. He's got a spiritual element to what he talks about and what he does as well in his own personal life. So he's one of my favorite speakers.
awesome. Thanks so much. Well, I know we're starting to wrap up here, but I did want to ask a couple of more just quick questions just for fun. So what are you reading right now?
Mm.
The last book you read.
Yeah. So right now I'm reading The Myth of Normal by Gabor Mate. I just started it. I'm on page like 40, but I love Gabor Mate. He's the guy who did The Wisdom of Trauma. And so he's like an addiction specialist guy who talks about, you know, what it is to be normal. And it turns out there is no normal. And actually maybe our society has created this idea of normal based on not truth. And I mean, this is one of the things that I talk to the people in my life is like sometimes people are having completely normal reactions to the trauma they've experienced, and it looks like something's wrong, but actually, that's a completely normal human way to react to what they experienced, you know?
Uh,
So I'm kind of interested in that idea of what is really normal.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. I forgot a question I wanted to ask you real quick. What made you decide to go with culture partners rather than staying as your own entity?
You know, I was that's a great question because I spent a lot of time debating this, and I mean, the answer is Joe Terry. I mean, CEO of Culture Partners is one of these people that once you have a conversation with him, you're like, I will follow you to the ends of the earth. Like, where do we go? Just don't even tell me. I'm just going to start following you. And one of his executives, I was interviewing with her, and she said, you know, there are those leaders who have a great vision and you follow them because of the vision. And then there are those leaders who don't even have a vision and you follow them because of them. He's both. And I
Oh,
was like,
wow.
wow, I've never heard
Wow.
that sincere of a compliment. So I knew that it was my gut reaction was real. And I remember telling him, like, I'm nervous about giving up my thing. I mean, this is my
Right.
baby. I've been
Yeah.
nurturing this forever. And he said, well, you're going to have to decide if you want to do it alone or you want to do it together. And I was like, oh, yeah, I want to do it together. So it was the best decision
Wow.
ever. I kind of laugh at myself for spending so much time thinking about it now. It was like, what was I thinking? This is the best decision I've ever made, you know?
That's fantastic. Well, because a lot of people that are listening to this might be considering leaving their 9 to 5, or perhaps they're out on their own thinking about the other. It really depends. So it's very helpful to hear your story on that. And what a great, powerful, really conclusion to it. Do you want to do it together? It makes sense. All right, Jessica. Well, thank you so much for being here. I know we've got a hard stop here, so I appreciate your time. And is there anything else that you did want to say before we wrap up?
Yeah, what are you reading right now?
What am I reading? I'm reading a book called God is Able, and it is absolutely fascinating because it's, first of all, it's so simple,
Yeah.
and it's breaking down the scripture verse of Ephesians. Oh gosh, now this is going to test test what it is, but
Better sound
basically,
smart, Karen.
God, I know that's right. God is able to do exceedingly and abundantly more than you could ever dare to ask or imagine.
Oh, that's great. I think I have a book on my bookshelf that I haven't read yet called God Can't. So it's the
Oh,
opposite of your
hilarious.
book. We can trade.
Yes, that's right. They'd even each other out. Yeah,
Oh,
I love
funny.
it. All right. Well, thanks so much, Jessica. Appreciate you being here today.
Yeah, thank you, Karen. This has been an awesome chat. I look forward to many more.
Likewise. And that's a wrap of another episode of Ignite Your Confidence. I'm your host, Karen Laus. Thank you so much for listening. If you loved today's episode, please subscribe and leave a review. It helps other people find the podcast faster, and it certainly helps me. If you're interested in more tips and tools around confidence, please join me over in my Facebook group called Ignite Your Confidence with Karen Laus. Remember, you too can stand out with unshakable confidence.